This is where you're going to die. Posted in the Let's Not Meet subreddit by Veronica Osaki. This happened at the beginning of the year when everything in my city is really quiet and lonely because everyone's on vacation. It was around 4 p.m. and I had gone to a mall that's near my house to get some waxing done, only to find the place closed because of what I said above. I exited the place and I heard a strange laughter to my left that caught my attention. I turned to see a tall man, nothing particularly strange about him except for the fact that he was completely alone, walking in the opposite direction of where I was going. The man noticed that I'd looked at him, so he changed directions to head in the same direction I was going. I started to get a little nervous as the man was walking behind me and continued to emit the same weird laughter, always with the same tone, like the same laugher played again and again. The streets were completely lonely, so I started walking faster. Suddenly the man got really close behind me, and I heard him say, "This is where you're going to die." We were in a sidewalk next to an empty lot that used nowadays as a parking lot. Now I got really scared and I walked as fast as I could without running. Luckily for me, I suddenly ran into a girl that used to work with me on a candy store back in 2014. I said hi to her and immediately told her that this weird guy was following me and laughing all by himself, and I turned around to point at him, but by that point, the guy had suddenly crossed the street and was quite far away now, but still staring at me. He obviously changed his mind about following me after I'd run into an acquaintance. He continued to walk along the opposite sidewalk until I lost track of him. I haven't seen him again, even though I walk the same street frequently. Please LARP responsibly, posted in the Let's Not Meet subreddit by Evelyn in Jaduki. Around 2004, I was about 15 and in my 4th year of secondary or high school. I lived in a suburban street that had a large open field, a short walkway, and we would always walk the dogs around the field. Sometimes I'd go for a jog there to get outside and just do something. A long time before I would have my own PC and sit around indoors doing sweet FA. At the time, I was into fantasy fiction, including an Aragon, and looking into role-playing tabletop games and so on. In my first year of secondary school, in 2001, our form tutor, Mr. Smith, had surprised us all by letting us into his life as a longtime D&D games master and full-on LARP enthusiast. Naturally, we had a D&D after-school club, and the big surprise was when he brought his LARP group to battle on the school field. Seeing crossbow bolts fly and learning how to chainmail was forged a real eye-opener and made me more comfortable in the D&D tabletop hobby. Flashback to 2004, my parents were out for the day seeing my aunt and uncle in the next county, so I was walking the dogs alone across the field. It was an average walk. We chased the rabbits and dogs and rolled every bit of dirt it was possible to roll in, and suddenly, out of the cluster of trees near the bottom of the hill, slipped an 11 Ranger, bow and arrows in hand, pursued by a warlock wearing a Black Sabbath t-shirt. A fighter with a massive, unwieldy greatsword and a tall, mustachioed man with a quarter-staff. I was actually quite taken aback when I saw it, but there was no mistaking that this was a LARP group here on the field, mere yards from my house. It took me a few moments to work up the courage to approach, but I did, with the dogs on the leash, muzzled, not because they're vicious, but because it stops them pulling the walker every bloody which way. I was thinking that which would be enough of a deterrent if things were south, but hoping they would be friendly, being a teenager with conflicting thoughts drilled into me from an early age. Don't talk to strangers. Don't judge a book by its cover. Anyway, I figured I could approach safely, and they seemed friendly enough, starting by immediately embracing me as a fellow tabletop gamer and realigning with the tales of how their party had vanquished a goblin or whatever. It was all very enthralling, and before too long, we were introduced. I forget most of the names, but it's the mustachioed man who is the GM who sticks with me as the focus of this post. Damian Rogers. After introductions were done, it was just starting to rain and the dogs were becoming restless. Damian said that as the weather was worsening, they were going to go inside his house and play double cash on the GameCube. And did I want to join them? There'd be cookies and hot chocolate and video games for everyone. That was tempting, but at least I remembered that strangers were still strangers and you shouldn't enter someone's house randomly, since that was a massive risk. I said I had to take the dogs home, but maybe when the weather cleared up, I'd be up for joining their LARP group. It didn't quite go that way. It turned out that Damien had moved into my street, a fair distance up the road closer to the field, so if I ever wanted to walk the dogs, I had to walk past his house, and conveniently, he was often just by the door, leaning out the window when I went past. He'd ask when I was going to join the LARP group, which I occasionally saw practicing combat in the fields on weekends. I was busy studying for school, of course, so I could only say, when I have the time. He'd also ask if I wanted to come up to play games or have a cookie, which I still politely declined. I mentioned Damien to my parents, and my dad says seems like a weirdo. My mom says he's just being a grumpy old fool about it, but then my dad have quite astute observational and contextual common sense. I probably should have listened to him earlier. School comes back into the picture. Mr. Smith, my first-year form tutor, tells me he's heard from a close friend that I'm interested in getting into the LARP scene. I wonder, who is it? It's Damien. This is unsurprising, actually, since Mr. Smith was, in fact, head of the largest LARP group in the county and would have ties with a lot of people in the hobby. Turns out that Damien and Mr. Smith are indeed quite close friends. I hear from Mr. Smith that Damien hasn't quite finished the moving out process and needs help moving things out of his mother's house. I feel like this is the opportunity to change my dad's mind about Damien and let slip that he has a van large enough to move considerable amount of furniture, intending to ask him later about it. The next time I pass Damien's house with the dogs, he waves me down and asks if my dad is available to help me move the remainder of his things from his mother's house. I'm a bit jarred by the suggestion, but again, he and Mr. Smith were quite close friends, and it seemed natural that the information would have gotten passed on. So, on the way back from our daily walk, Damien's just leaving the house and asks if he can meet my dad to discuss our van for his move. I agree and we walk to the house. This was my first mistake. Now he knows the exact number in the street where I live, if he didn't already. I tell him to wait in the front yard and take the dogs down the side alley to the back garden to let them off the leash. I do not lock the side gate. This is my second mistake. I go inside, take off my shoes, and look for Dad, but can't find him. I go to the kitchen and speak to my mom and say I have Damien outside and would like to talk about using Dad's van to help move his extra furniture. Mom turns to me from what she's doing and literally drops everything with a yelp of terror. Damien is standing right behind me. He's quite tall, so his mustached face is fully visible behind my head. I have no idea how I didn't hear him. He entered the house completely silently. The dogs made no noise about it. The door didn't slam, etc., etc. This is my first warning that something is not quite right with this man. Initial fright over, he introduces himself quite pleasantly. Mom berates me later for leaving the side gate unlocked, and quite rightly, too. Dad gets back from the job he was working out back behind the garage. He is a car mechanic for a living and is surprised to see the weirdo standing in our house. Handshakes and names are exchanged, and Damien gets straight to it, asking a price for moving his furniture for this upcoming weekend. To my surprise, Dad jumps at the chance and says, "No charge for neighbors, it's what we do for each other." My dad at this point in life is a xenophobic, homophobic cynic who is convinced there is no one in the world who doesn't have their own perverted agenda. He's since changed for the better, and I can say he's just a plain cynic now. So the neighbor's bull is totally an act. He would only help out the next door neighbors because he's known them for 30 plus years and trusts them implicitly. New neighbors up the street, 10-foot barge pole. I don't question it vocally, and certainly not in front of Damon. I wait for the weekend. The weekend comes and Dad seems very excited. Again, unusual. I get in the van with him and Mum, and we all tail Damien and his wife Alice in their car back to his mother's house in the next neighborhood. Up to this point, I've only ever seen Alice briefly, sometimes gardening, sometimes with an actual tray of cookies, perhaps to prove they exist. She doesn't seem all there in the head, unfortunately, sometimes muttering to herself the same phrase over and over, or prancing back and forth, doing nothing. It's a real shame because on the few occasions I have spoken to her lucidly, she's only ever been polite, cheerful, usually pointing out butterflies or interesting flowers nearby. Turns out Damon actually has a fair collection of junk that needs bringing to his new home, so we set to work. Mr. Smith shows up too with his family to help clear the old house. It's refreshing to see him as a person instead of a teacher. With that, seems like a happy family. His wife is Scottish, loud, and absolutely bubbly, immediately making everyone tea. It's a busy slog of a day, clearing out cabinets and chairs and so on. Apparently Damon's mother's house is mostly his possessions, with his mother occupying just one of the bedrooms. We, my parents and I, attempt to tackle the upstairs bedroom belonging to him. Well, they stop for another round of tea. Removing the mattress from the bedstead reveals some objects which I wish I could forget, including a stack of tantric sex manuals, the Kama Sutra, sex toys, etc. There is also a pair of passports. My dad picks up the passports and opens them, then puts them back down where they were and writes something down in a notebook and puts back in his pocket. We let the Rogers tackle the rest of the bedroom and noticed Dad had returned to his absolute state of cynicism and what Mom refers to as old man grump face. Nothing more of note happened the rest of the day, even moving everything back to the new house. That night my dad warned me to stop talking to Damien Rogers and his wife Alice. Ever since the first mention of him, my dad had been keeping notes in his daily diary about his activities like paranoid conspiracy theorist. The passports had been the final straw. Rogers was not his real surname. Dad had written the real name down and cross-checked immediately with multiple authorities to discover that this person was a registered sex offender. He ensured the entire street knew about it before Monday. Angry reports were filed to the council and police by multiple people. I believe Damien's window was smashed by a thrown brick one or two more of the days, smashed, repaired, smashed again, boarded over. His house was spray-painted with nasty words. I would not wish this upon anyone. It actually made me quite sad to see the violent response from my neighborhood. Mr. Smith claimed to have no knowledge of Damien's past and told me that he cut all ties with him immediately after he found out what happened. It was reported to the school by both parents and police that sex offender was living nearby. I believe Mr. Smith wholly on this and bear him no ill will as he continued to be a trusted friend and mentor. Damien did not live on our street for very long after that. I have not seen Alice wandering the streets of my home, carrying bags of shopping from the supermarket, occasionally smiling, but very often wearing a sullen, empty, blank face. I have, however, never seen Damien, and hope I do not cross paths with him again. Boarding School Stalker, posted on the Let's Not Meet subreddit by Pass the Kleenex. I went to boarding school in England for a few years of high school. in this super cool old town. My best friend and I shared a dorm while we were about 16 to 17 years old, and we're on the second floor of the house. We were on an exam study leave where you do not attend classes, merely study on your own time for 4 weeks before our final exams at the end of the year. Every day we would wake up late, spend ages getting ready, and walk into town to get to lunch. Outside our bedroom across the street, there was a small grassy area and a cluster of trees. The town was hosting an anniversary celebration that week, and there were statues temporarily placed on the grassy area. Many tourists stopped by to take pictures. My friend and I opened the curtains and the window because it was such a beautiful day. As we were getting changed, we noticed a man in some kind of uniform taking pictures of the house, with a decent camera, easily able to zoom and maintain focus, which was nothing new but prompted us to shut the curtains while we were changing. We walked to town and noticed the same guy in the grocery store with us. His camera was away now, and he saw us and started walking towards us. We quickly walked to the other side of the store where we lost him. We paid at the back entrance and left this way in order to throw him off our trail. We sat in front of the church at the other end of the street and ate our lunch, sunbathing and lounging around before noticing the man was walking quickly in our direction. We ran all the way back to the main area of town where he was still following us. Neither of us had our cell phones, and there was not many people around at the time. He didn't bother us again that day, but our house parent mentioned that she had seen him zooming in on the house from the street and had him removed from our campus. The next day we were careful with the windows and told the house parent before leaving. She followed us 50 feet behind, and sure enough, she saw him emerging from a side street and following us through town. She ran up to him, but he ran faster to his car and sped away. We never saw him again. I hate to think what would have happened if our house parent hadn't been following us.